Welcome back. We're ready to tackle our most complicated graph yet. We're going to do a line graph. Sounds simple enough, but here is our data set right here. It's the average annual household income according to generations. So you have time going by, but you also have different generations having a different amount of money, and some generations don't have any data sets earlier because they weren't even born yet. So this will kind of show kind of overlapping generations of what different generations made at different times in their lifespan. And so we don't have a line chart that's going to span all the way across for all of them. So you see we have missing some data sets here. So just like the pie chart with Adobe Illustrator, if you don't see it on your toolbar, just go down here to Edit Toolbar and go ahead and drag that in. It's going to look just like this. It's going to be the line graph tool. So go ahead and select that. All you have to do is just like the pie chart, click and drag, and it's going to go ahead and pop up with this little dialog menu where you can input your data. So what we're needing to do is we're needing to get a realistic line graph that goes across the different numbers. So right near here I have them labeled. So I have our silent generation, which is the first kind of generation we're doing. We have generation X, generation Y, and generation Z. So I'm putting in all of their data sets. As you know, there's some data sets missing because Gen Z wasn't even born in that first data set. So I just want you to kind of study this a little bit, how I set this up. Go ahead and put in those numbers and give it a try to kind of experiment how to get the line graph correct. It actually took me quite a while to figure out what columns to use and how to kind of break this down. So just kind of take a moment, pause, kind of study how I set up the columns in this. You're going to click on the checkbox when you're ready, and you're going to get a chart that looks a lot like this. So we have our different charts and we have our labels. So if you go back to here, you can see I'll have the labels on the top of each column, and that's going to show up in your key right over here. So let's go ahead and create all this for you. So there's a few things we can do. We can go ahead and go up to Object, ungroup it, and start to kind of put our own visual spin to it, make it more exciting and visually compelling. Or we can even keep the line graph editable and add some different items to it, or add a visual appeal to it without having to ungroup it and break the graph. So I'm going to show you how to do that, but in the end we're going to break the graph, and I'm going to add a whole lot more than I can do if I kept the graph intact or editable. So I'm going to go ahead, and what you can do is grab the direct selection tool, and you can directly select any of these objects and change it just like you would a regular object. Just try not to ungroup it. Go to Object and Ungroup. Once you do that, it's no longer connected or editable. So let's take this really long one. Let's make it nice. So I'm just directly selecting all these little elements, and I can go down here to my stroke panel. I can increase the thickness. I can add a nice round cap to it, which it already is. I can make it a different color, make it red if I wanted to, and so on and so on. And what's great about doing it this way without ungrouping it and just using the direct selection tool is I still have it editable in my graph. So I can go ahead and change this data set to a 22,000, and it's going to update it. And it's going to keep the look and feel of it as well. So you can keep going with that and keep it intact just in case you're not comfortable with the numbers and the client wants to add a data set. You don't have to go back and try to figure that out manually. That could be very helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm really happy with kind of the basic setup of these lines, and we're going to do something a little creative with it. So I'm going to go ahead and ungroup this and no longer make it editable. So I'm going to go up to Object. I'm going to go ahead and select our graph first. Let's go ahead and close this. Go to Object, Ungroup, and I'm going to say yes, that's fine. And so now I have them just as individual objects, and now we can really play around graphically with how this looks. So being able to use the line chart kind of tool in Adobe Illustrator saved us a lot of time from having to figure out all the data points and doing it manually. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and drag it down, and let's put it in our dark background and start making some design decisions. And it could take up quite a bit of room, as we already kind of planned in the beginning that we're going to have a lot of room for this particular infographic. I went ahead and I added labels. So let me see if I can't get this to be white so I can kind of see. I'll show you. I just added simple labels, one for each data set. As we know, the time goes forward. Just look at your original data set and figure out how you need to label that. And so I'm just making all the black things white so we can have some high contrast and kind of see what we have going on here. And also you're going to have to right click and ungroup to have access to some of these elements. Okay, great. So now that we have kind of our basic chart set up, we can mess around with typography a little bit. Let's ungroup this. Let's make this a thinner weight, maybe a little bit smaller. Make it a nice lightweight. Just kind of make it a little more slick. Maybe we can make the years a little bit bigger and bolder. So we have bold here. Do we have bold oblique? Let's just do regular bold. This is where it really gets to be fun as a designer. Kind of past the data set. We got the data set perfect and according to how it should be. So now we can add a slick polish to it. So I'm just going to ungroup all these elements and see what we could do with these line charts. Let's add kind of a cool nice gradient to it. So let's see if we can't just sample super duper bright color for this one. Let's make it green. We might have to ungroup it. We got a lot of ungrouping that comes with these charts. So make sure I have this in isolation. Let's ungroup one more time. There we go. So now we can go ahead and sample green. Flip that to stroke. Make sure I have my nice round cap on because I just think that looks more polished. Okay, that's a data set right here. I kind of like how it's all connected, or how it's instead of one big long gradient, it's kind of segmented like that. Kind of looks really interesting. We can also do something with these squares here. We can make those white, or we can add our own. And I think we should add our own. Let's do the ellipse tool, and we're just going to grab the gradient that we used. And we're going to flip it to fill, add a little bit of a drop shadow to this, and kind of put it on top of our data point. Maybe we can make that, change the gradient just a tiny bit, make it a little softer, just like that. Maybe we can mess with the drop shadow a little bit more. And I can always just go to my properties panel. If I can't find my properties panel, I can always just pop it up, bring it up, double click on drop shadow. Let's preview this. Let's see if we can't make it stronger, nice and strong. Maybe the blur is a little bit too much. Let's do 0.05. There we go, nice. You can really kind of see that. And we can even add another circle. So I'm just going to hold down Option and drag and make a smaller circle here. Maybe we can make this like a gray gradient. I can always just go to Edit, Edit Colors, and I'm just going to go down to Convert to Grayscale. This is just a quick way to change a color, anything from color that's a color gradient to a grayscale gradient. Kind of saves us a little time instead of having to go into the gradient panel and making adjustments there. I just want a little pop of gray. So now I do have to go into my gradient panel. Do my gradient panel, let's like push some of these back, maybe drop that darker color, and that'll lighten it quite a bit, maybe make this pure white. So now we have a white to a gray. Let's do a drop shadow on this. Since it remembered our drop shadow settings up here in the effects, we just have to recall it up here. So Effect, Drop Shadow. So I'm just in my drop shadow panel, and I have kind of these settings set up, a little bit of blur, a little bit of distance, and a pretty strong gradient. You can kind of see it kind of looks like it casts a little bit of a shadow. I'm just doing small edits now, just making it even brighter. There we go. Has a nice kind of metallic look to it. We can zoom out and see if we kind of like how that data set looks. We can always make this, we haven't outlined this path on this, so we can always make that a little bit skinnier. And that'll bring out the strength of that a little bit. So now that we like that, let's go ahead and group that little element together, and we could just hold down Option and kind of drag it manually over these points. And it's so much easier to do this than to keep the graph live. Well, once you have the data sets, if you don't think the data sets are going to change, it's always, I just find it easier and more creative to unlock that graph and just start to do things manually at that point. So let's find a different color for this one. Of course, we're going to have to change our labels, our key on the right. So let's do this a nice contrast from green. Let's do a bright purple, or maybe this kind of orange color. And we can adopt the same stroke. So let's find out what stroke we have here. We have a 3-point stroke. So let's do a 3-point stroke here. Do our rounded cap. And we don't need these little points anymore. And we could delete those, and we can go ahead and make our adjustments and see what it looks like using these colors. So now let's do a nice purple that'll contrast great from the green and orange. So I'm just adopting some of these same colors we've been using throughout the class. And you can access these same gradients in the downloadable sheet that I'll have provided in the resources. So just doing the same settings there and just getting rid of some of these points and just doing the same thing. So I'm just going to copy and paste this one down here and then make that purple. And for the last data set, I'll make that purple in a little bit. You have this one little data set. We only have one for the generation Z because they haven't been alive for very long. So they just have one data point. We don't want to forget that little guy right there. So we're just going to copy and paste, and we'll have to make that its own color. It doesn't really have a connecting line because it doesn't have a second data set. So let me adjust some of these colors, and then we're going to start looking at the graph as a whole to see if there's any way we can streamline it a little bit and save some room.